I was born an artist, supposedly, with a crayon in my hand, but I'm not sure I believe that story exactly. I do remember drawing a lot as a kid, and I never questioned whether I was going to be an artist or not. I grew up knowing that I was going to be an artist. So there wasn't ever a time when I decided that I was going to be an artist. So then in grade school, I drew a lot. I drew in all my textbooks all through grade school and high school, and even in art school when we had Shakespeare. I didn't really pay much attention to that. And so then I graduated from art school with a bachelor in fine arts, thinking I was going to be an illustrator. But when I was going to be a senior at the art school, I found a show in a gallery just by walking by that I was drawn to, and I went in, and it was 3 wildlife artists, Rod Frederick and Mort Solberg and Stephen Lyman. And I knew who they were kind of, but I went in there and I met them, and I found that there was a whole world I didn't know about in art, wildlife art, and that there were shows and there was a huge market for wildlife art. And so that just pretty much made me want to change my direction from studying illustration into going into fine art, wildlife art. And so I went back to school and I talked to my illustration professor, and he agreed that I could focus on that my senior year as kind of a individualized study program, since I had done all my requirements. So the last year in art school, I concentrated on making some wildlife art paintings, and then after I graduated, I immediately went into that field, applying to art shows, and I got into some, and spent the next, I don't know, quite a few years traveling around the country going to art shows with my wildlife art paintings. And then in about the 1990s, that market crashed when the print market went out. And at that time, I had also been doing interpretive signage for wildlife refuges and nature trails. And so I really got into that big time. And then when that kind of dried up with our government's funding kind of going downhill, I started to go back into fine art painting again. And so now that's where I'm at now. I'm kind of really involved in regional paintings of landscape with the wildlife and nature that we have all around us. And I guess it's come full circle in a way, because I've been putting all kinds of life forms in my paintings, like I did with my interpretive signage, where there'd be a whole bunch of birds on a sign. So now I've put a whole bunch of birds in each painting. And so I think it's all coming together for me now at this stage in my career. About 7 years ago, I decided to limit my subject matter to extremely regional subjects of the Pacific Northwest. And sometimes people will tell you not to do that in the arts because it really cuts down on the amount of people that might be interested in your work. But I just felt like that's what I was going to be doing my best work, and decided that it was worth the time and effort, and maybe the lack of being marketable nationwide, for me to really hone in on what I was really drawn to paint. And then that would be how my best work would come out, when I was really concentrating on what I really loved. And that is this environment in the Pacific Northwest, the rainy forest and the moss and the water and the rain all the time. And of course we have sun too, but we don't want to tell people that, because then, we'll lose our reputation. And all the birds and wildlife that dwell in the habitats around us. And so much of the art that I have displayed in this show reflects that. And much of it was done on location. When I go out and spend time in nature, I will often sit and paint. And some of them I complete on location, and some of them I bring back to the studio, and I might add something to, like a bird that maybe I saw when I was up painting, but of course they fly away so fast that it's pretty impossible to paint them right then and there. So instead I come back to the studio with my memory and maybe a really terribly loose, messy sketch like I do. And then I will put the bird into the scene as I remember. And I do that a lot. painting is an example of probably my whole life's experience. My interpretive illustration, where I put lots of different species, plants and animals into one scene, and my love of the environment that is around here, the waterfalls and the wildlife and the moss, and what I'm drawn to artistically with shapes and patterns, and being able to travel back into a scene and trying to construct a scene that you feel compelled to want to go into. So this painting I constructed, it's actually a figment of my imagination. It's based on some waterfalls in the gorge and some different places that we've all been to in the gorge, like Oneonta Falls and Monoma Falls and several others there. But I made this up because I wanted it to be an example of kind of not generic, but concentrated vision of the region that is known as Cascadia, that coastal Northwest. And so this painting is called Cascadia, and it's built on a framework of V shapes, and you can see all the V shapes in it, where the waterfall comes down, the gorge, there's tree shapes, the way the branches by the bird come into a V, and there's all kinds of V's. If you just look around, you'll see them sideways V's and upside down V's. There's all kinds of them. This was very difficult to construct, and it went through several phases of changes. And since it's acrylic, I can do that. If this was watercolor, I would have thrown it out about 500 times and started over, because you can't goof with watercolors ever. But acrylics are great. You can just paint on them until there's no mistakes left. So this painting has something that I'm really conscious of doing when I paint, and that is creating layers of interest. And that is that the first layer is a good abstract shape. So if you took all the detail off and just had darks and lights, it would be an interesting abstract design. And so on top of that, then I put the textures of nature, like the moss and the rocks and the leaves, and try to make the water look wet and try to make the water look sparkly, and the atmosphere of the haze from the water, and try to evoke a sense of the temperature that you might experience when you walk into the scene, and also the way it smells and the way the water sounds. That's also important to me also, that your other senses are engaged in your imagination. That gives me great pleasure when people say they can hear the water or smell the forest when they look at my paintings. That's the best compliment I could get. When it comes to paint, there's a couple different ways you can think about paint if you're an artist. And if you're an impressionist artist, it's all about the paint. It's about the brush strokes and the surface of the painting. And if you're a realist painter, it's about hiding the paint and the brush strokes so that people see the object that it is first in sort of a way that they can relate to it as in real life. Now, I'm not a photorealist, but I am a realist. But I also incorporate some aspects of impressionism in the first layers of my painting. And then I don't want to hide all my brush strokes when I'm done. So I want my paintings to be first about the subject matter, in which the first thing that you noticed is the texture and the object itself. Like, that's a bird and it has form, and that's moss and I can put my fingers on it and it's kind of wet, and that's water and it has transparency. So those things are based in realism. And then the next thing that I want you to notice when you come up closer is the actual paint and the brush strokes. So I try not to smooth everything out, and I try to leave brush strokes so that close up it's kind of impressionistic, and then as you back up it comes together and forms the subject that you're looking at in a more realism kind of way. One of the things I love to do is paint miniature art. This is 2.5 inches by 3.5 inches. It's very, very small. And I wear very strong readers when I do these, because I can't see to do them otherwise, because I'm too old anymore to see up close very well. So this one is a painting of a famous lighthouse called Terrible Tilly, and it's on a rock, and I think it's like 1.5 miles off the shore of Cascade Head near Tillamook, Oregon. And you can see how small that lighthouse is right there. But if you get up close to it, I don't know if you can do that. If you've seen this lighthouse, then you would recognize it in my painting. It was very, very small. Okay. This one, another one, same size, only vertical. I painted en plein air, which means in the open air in French. And it's a method of painting where you basically just paint on location what you see in front of you outside. And I did this one in a really shady little place with mosquitoes and everything, as I recall. And I was painting with a friend, which is always great to go out with friends, and we can talk back and forth about art and stuff and show each other our art. And I really liked this day because the light was filtering through the trees, and it was a challenge to capture a moment in time because the light changed every few minutes. Another thing that I've gotten into is metallic paint. When I was younger, I never would have considered this because, it's not realistic enough. But I've gotten way more lenient in my thinking as I've gotten older, and also I like sparkly, tacky things. And so I decided I'd go a little bit towards the tacky side of life, but not too far, and am incorporating this beautiful metallic paint effect. This is a painting in a series that is going to be ongoing called Moss Monsters, and it's where I see creatures hidden in the mossy forest on twigs, and then I'm inspired to paint them and show their personality as if they are little creatures. And I've decided that on this series to do the metallic background. And this one, it was a mossy, wet, actually it was mossy for sure, but it was a wet, rainy day, and there's water drops on it. Can you see the water drop? Maybe? Okay. And I think this is Moss Monster number 2. I've done 2, I've got another one planned, and I'm sure I'll do lots over the years. Here's another one with a metallic background. This is a white-crowned sparrow, and he's sitting on some thistle. And so I've named this one, what did I name this one? Throne of Thorns, even though he's sitting on some nice downy thistle. These sparrows come in the wintertime here, and they make huge flocks, and they hang around in the bushes and the shrubs. And this is one reason that I can tolerate winter, I guess, because the winter birds come in and get me through to spring when these guys leave and the spring birds come in. Metallic paint is very interesting. It actually is a mica particle with oxides applied to it, various metal oxides, and then it is suspended in an acrylic emulsion. So it actually is metallic particles in emulsion. Okay. Here's another one that I've done some metallic work with. This one is called, can you see the metallic? This one's called Tango, and it's a story of some trees in the forest, and they've formed partnerships and they're dancing. And there's one set of trees, let's see this one over here. See that one? He's not very nice to his partner because he's trying to get to dance with this other one, so he's trying to break up the couple on this side. So there's a lot of drama in the forest if you look for it. And I've taken the metallic paint on this and used it to show the energy between the trees by highlighting the trees with it, if you can see that. When deciding what it is that I'm going to paint, I will be out exploring nature, and sometimes it will just be out somewhere without knowing where I'm going to end up, and sometimes it'll be a planned trip. And whatever catches my eye is what I'll do. And light is very important in that, and weather, and also if I can find a place to paint where I won't get sunburned, that's really important. So I have a big, huge umbrella, but it changes the color, so I try to avoid getting under that if I get under. So, but sometimes inspiration comes from just something just seemingly just random. So this one is a painting that was inspired by a really bad photograph that I took when we were driving, and the sunset was nice, and I snapped a quick photo, and it was really blurry, but the color was there and the basic shape of the landscape. So I thought, it's a terrible photograph, but I could make it a good painting. So that's what this painting came from, and this is called Drive By Sunset. This one, I think this is one of my best paintings that I've ever done, and that is because the challenge of painting water, it's got to be probably the hardest thing to paint, probably, because water has no real color unless it has sediments in it, and then you can paint that, of course. But when it's clear, there's no color to it, and so what you're painting is what you can see through the water. And sometimes when there's, with this painting where it's all white, that's where the light is catching it and reflecting off of it. But otherwise, I'm painting what's under the water. And the wetness of the water will change the color of the rocks and whatever it's on top of. So that to me is a fascinating challenge, and I'm always trying to get better at that. This painting is a little waterfall that is behind a very special place in the gorge called the Villa, and it's a place where I think it's a Franciscan order of nuns live there, and they also teach at a school in Portland, I think. And it's a Italian villa style. It's beautiful, beautiful house, and it's right up against a hillside. And behind the hillside is a trail that goes up to a waterfall, which I also painted. There's another one here somewhere. And this painting here is right behind the villa, and I was sheltered from the very, very windy day that day, and I did this entire painting on location, and it took 3 hours. This painting is behind the villa in the gorge, and to get here you have to go up a little trail behind the villa, and so I hauled all my painting stuff up there and sat by this fall, and this is the lower part of the fall. Above it is another big, huge fall above it, but this is the lower Koopy Falls. And I was with a group of people, but none of them came up there with me, so I was up there all by myself, and I felt like I was being watched the whole time, and it must have been Bigfoot, I was thinking. But I did hear birds and the sound of the water again, which I'm hoping that when people see this, they can hear the rushing water and maybe also feel like Bigfoot is watching them. But that was quite the adventure also. This painting, it was done on a very memorable day. It was gorgeous and sunny, as you can see. It's at a place called Elk Meadows, and that's Mount Hood. And I was with a group of fun painters, and there's a kind of a back road there, and they were all parked up on the road painting this mountain scene. But I decided with a friend to go back into the woods a little bit, and it's all huckleberries and woods, and it's really beautiful. So I was back in there, and I was painting, and all of a sudden a chipmunk dropped out of nowhere and landed on my lap. And that made me dump my paint box right into the huckleberries, and I jumped out, and I think everybody thought something happened to me. And then later that day, one of our friends up on the road started to sing, and they all got into a very nice rendition of Edelweiss. And so I was back in the woods all by myself, and I could hear them singing, and the music was flowing over this meadow. The reason why I paint is not very complex, but there is definitely a reason. I was born with a gift, and I feel like it's something that I need to share, that it's not mine for myself, that it's for other people. So when I go out and I see beauty in the world, and I feel compelled to translate it into paint, that when I do that, and it gives joy to the viewer, that's the reason that I paint. That putting more beauty into the world through how it is translating from one medium, reality, into another, paint, is just something that I was gifted to do, and that's what I'm supposed to do with my life. And so I hope that the viewers of my art get out of it something that gives them joy, and that the biggest thing for me is if that they are compelled to go out and experience these places and be inspired to protect them and to nurture them and to bring their family and children into these places, and so that these places can be preserved for future generations. And so that also is important for me as a painter, to compel people to really look at the world around them and feel a connection to it and to be part of it, and to realize that this little planet we're on is special and that we need to take care of it and